So last year, my husband Chris and I finally capitulated to our 10-year-old son's demands, and we got him a puppy, a little dog, a Yorkie poo, and we named him Ashby. Now, Ashby's a city dog, right? Raised in D.C., he's now wise in the ways of urban dog living. He can hold his own with the garbage rats and the alley cats. But take him out of the city and he's a little confused. For instance, last month on vacation, we had an unfortunate encounter with a skunk. It still smells. Now, Ashby had never spent much time around the water. He'd never been swimming, in fact, until one day last summer when we took him to an ocean beach not far from here. They tell you you're supposed to gradually introduce your dog to the water, so they feel safe and don't develop a fear. But when the dog that Ashby was playing with at the beach that day bounded into the ocean after a ball, Ashby didn't hesitate to follow. He plunged into the water after the dog and quickly disappeared beneath the water's surface. When he came up for air, I could see the surprise and the fear in his face. How strange it must have felt for him not to feel the solid earth beneath his little paws. But those paws did exactly what instinct teaches them to do. They started paddling furiously. And Ashby found his stride, or his stroke, I guess. And there was this moment after he'd figured out he could swim when I thought I saw the fear in his eyes disappear, and he just looked like a happy puppy again. His tail out of the water, wagging back and forth as he swam. It was as if in that moment he understood that he could trust the water, and that if he let it, it would hold him up. And then he got out of the ocean and shook himself off. I was so proud of him. In fact, here's a picture of Ashby from that day at the beach. I asked Cade to just put up a little picture of him. Is he up there yet? There he is. Yeah, that's Ashby. There he is. I mean, let's be real. Sometimes a puppy picture is really the only sermon you need on a Sunday morning, right? Thanks, Cade. As I've reflected this week on why I wanted to share that story this morning, I realized that perhaps I'd been projecting my own emotions onto my dog's experience, and that there was something about this dynamic between fear and trust that was important to me. And I realized that over the last several years, I've been experiencing a kind of emotional whiplash. Sometimes overwhelmed with feelings of fear and panic over the state of our world and the well-being of myself and the people that I love. And on the other hand, sometimes feeling a sense of peace and trust that everything's going to be okay, that we'll be all right. And I feel like I'm not the only one. I feel like I'm seeing friends, I feel like I'm seeing congregants struggle with this too. And so it's this dynamic of fear and trust that I'd like to explore with us a little bit this morning. Look, sometimes we find ourselves in over our heads in dangerous waters, right? And just like Ashby first seized up with panic and fear, so are we sometimes gripped by that fear. Now you can say, well, Ashby's just an animal, but so are we after all. And we share with our fellow members of the animal kingdom that fight or flight response that gets triggered when we face what we perceive as a threat, right? And while this biological adaptation can serve us well in crises, sometimes our bodies and our brains get stuck in this fight or flight place. And we find ourselves living in a near constant state of dis-ease, of fear. It feels like we're living through that kind of moment right now, doesn't it? I mean, can we just step back for a moment and reflect on what we've all been through these last years? For 4 years, we were gaslit by a president whose administration threatened many of the people that we love and the values we cherish. Then a once-in-a-century pandemic upended our lives, robbing us of precious time and freedom, and for some of us, precious loved ones. Our democracy is under siege from armed insurrectionists and anti-democratic politicians. Civil rights we once thought secure, the right to vote, a woman's right to reproductive health care, can no longer be taken for granted. And every day, it seems, the news offers a searing reminder of the existential threat of climate change. The lives that we perhaps once took for granted, the futures we once imagined, seem increasingly uncertain, precarious. We could be forgiven if we sometimes feel these days like we're living in a threatening and hostile world. I don't think it's overstating the case, I'm certainly not the first person to suggest it, that we as a society have lived through a kind of collective trauma over these last years. A trauma that's taken a toll on our bodies, our hearts, our spirits. I know I feel it. I don't know about you, but sometimes I find myself noticing what's going on inside of me, and I'm saying to myself, wow, where did that quick temper come from? Or what's with all that fear and anxiety that keeps bubbling up inside of me? Or the sorrow right just below the surface of my living? I think a lot of it is related to what we've all been through over these last years. You know what? I don't think I'm alone in this. Am I? No, okay. Because, I look around and I notice it expressing itself in our society, the rise of incivility, the increasingly coarse way we treat one another, the microaggressions, the macroaggressions, the demonization of those who are different or who disagree, our pandemic isolation, the militias in their bunkers. It's like we're all hunkered down, stuck in that fight and flight response, that ancient reptilian part of our brain, our lizard selves, right? I don't want to live like this. This isn't how we have to live. But I wonder what it'll take for us to kind of collectively unclench, to breathe again, to believe again, to trust again that though we live in difficult times, there are wellsprings of love and strength and grace that hold us, that buoy us up, that help see us through the storm. Right? I don't pretend to have all the answers. And I know that for some of us struggling in the wake of trauma, one answer is to seek the help we need, the professional help that we need. But are there other resources, spiritual, emotional resources, that we can all draw upon as we move through these difficult times? I've found that I've been coming back to kind of an old parable of the sea that someone once told me, and that I've shared a couple of times. Maybe some of you know it, but it's been helping me lately. And it's a story about two waves on the ocean. Maybe you know it. These two waves, they were the best of friends, and they had gently rolled over the high seas together for a long time, enjoying the sights and whiling away the hours, delighting in the freedom of being waves on an ocean. And then one day, the larger of the two waves spied something new on the horizon. He saw something out there, and at first it was barely noticeable, just a thin line. But as they drew closer, it became larger. The big wave described the scene to the smaller wave, who wasn't yet tall enough to see the horizon. He said, "Oh, little wave, I see something ahead, something large and solid, and we're heading straight for it." As they drew closer still, the big wave's anxiety only increased. "Oh, little wave, I see something terrible ahead. It seems to me that as the other waves reach this distant object, they disappear." And later, when they'd drawn still closer to the shore, the big wave said to his friend, "Little wave, it's even worse than I feared. It seems that when the waves reach this object, not only do they disappear, but there's a violent collision and they crash against the rocks. A terrible fate awaits us. What shall we do?" By now, the smaller wave could also see the shore and the fate that awaited them as they approached it, but the little wave remained calm and said to his friend, "Don't worry. Remember, we're not waves. We're the ocean." Right? Now, it's a simple story. I think there's a lot that could be said about this story, but I'll just point out a few things. One, when we find ourselves in the grip of anxiety and fear, and it seems like all hope is lost, it's good to have a friend around, right? It's good to have someone to talk to, someone to make the journey with, someone who can remind us that there might be a path forward that we hadn't considered yet. Sometimes I think that the most dangerous thing about this anxious time that we're living through is not all the threats that we face, but the fact that we face them, studies show, but as we face them, studies show, we are lonelier than we've ever been before. Reach out. Connect. We need one another now more than ever. 2, and I appreciate what you said earlier about this, Jennifer, because it's right on message with what I wanted to say. Sometimes it's good to be reminded that we are larger than we thought we were, right? That we are larger than our fear, that we are larger than our anxiety, larger even than the discrete individuals that we often imagine ourselves to be. Yeah, we're waves, but we're also the ocean. We belong to one another. We're connected to one another. And in the end, maybe this is why I bring my spirit to the sea. Because on its shores, I feel like I see myself for who I truly am. Small, yes. Vulnerable, yes. But also part of something infinitely larger, something ennobling, something enduring, something that gives me strength and courage and hope. May these truths be a source of comfort and strength for us in these trying times. Amen.